Hello class. In this video, I'd like to go over the MindTap case problem analysis for chapter 37. I have it up here on the screen already for you. And so what we'll do is just walk through the problem. Right. As you listen to me read this, you'll see or hear that the issue in this case involves the dissolution of the partnership. So let me just read for you. Dan and Lori Cole operated a Kerr's franchise exercise facility in Angola, Indiana as a partnership. The firm leased commercial space from Flying Cat LLC for a renewable 3-year term. The Coles renewed the lease for a second 3-year term. 2 years later, however, the Coles divorced and the partnership was dissolved. By the end of the second term, the Coles owed Flying Cat more than $21,000 on the lease. Without telling the landlord about the divorce, Lori signed another extension. More rent went unpaid. Flying Cat obtained a judgment in an Indiana state court against the partnership for almost $50,000. Can Dan be held liable, and why or why not? So this is our first time to walk through a case problem analysis, and please take note of the structure of this assignment because it's very similar from chapter to chapter. All right, so once you've read through the scenario, we'll have some questions, and usually the first questions are factual. All right, so number 1, in order to form a partnership, Dan and Lori were required to do which of the following? And I know it's really small, but I'll read them off for you. Form an agreement between themselves to become a partnership, rewrite bylaws, conform to federal regulations, or file minutes with the appropriate office in their state. For example, the Secretary of State. All right. So of the answers, the best answer is they're required to form an agreement between themselves to become a partnership. Number 2, what's an important reason for Dan and Lori to form a partnership? Here are our choices. To be taxed at the entity level. Well, we know that's not true for a partnership. Number 2, to be considered a corporation under state law. That makes no sense as an answer. Third choice, to establish joint ownership and share profits and losses. Or fourth answer, to file articles of organization with the Secretary of State. That fourth answer also doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The articles of organization are related to an LLC. All right. So the best choice here would be to establish joint ownership and share profits and losses. All right. Number 3, Dan and Lori are which of the following? Members, partners, or shareholders. They are partners of the partnership. Number 4. Now, numbers 4, 5, 6, and 7, they seem a little misplaced to me here because they pertain to an LLC, which is not covered in this chapter. So let's just walk through them fairly quickly. These questions will make more sense after we finish chapter 38. But number 4, limited liability companies. They are creatures of first, state constitutions, statute, or case law, or secondary sources. All right, a limited liability company is a creature of statute. Number 5, in order to form a limited liability company, Flying Cat would be required to file what document? And the document that an LLC uses when it's created is called the Articles of Organization. All right. The other answers here, bylaws applies to corporations, and it's not the formation document for a corporation. Regulations is not a formation document, and minutes are not for a formation document. All right, so that's correct. Articles of Organization. All right, number 6. Generally, are limited liability companies required to include words or initials such as limited liability company or LLC as part of the company name? And it is required. So, oh, did I hit the right thing? No, I did not. Sorry. Number 6, yes, it is required. All right, Going on to number 7. What is an important reason for Flying Cat to form as a limited liability company? All right, so now we have some reasons to form as an LLC. Is it to be taxed at the entity level? Is it to be considered a corporation under state law? Is it to protect the members from personal liability? Or is it to file articles of organization with the Secretary of State? All right, so of the choices there, what is the best choice? It's for the protection from personal liability, and we'll be learning more about this in the upcoming chapter. This protection is a lot like the corporate form, the personal liability that a corporate form offers to investors. All right, but now we can return. Oh no, actually one more question about LLCs, number 8. Generally, the liability of members of Flying Cat LLC would be limited to their respective, is it ownership interest in the company, investments in the company, or personal assets? All right, here, what is reachable? If you are a member of the LLC, your only thing that is reachable is your investment. If you're a creditor against an individual, the only thing against the LLC, the only thing you can reach of an owner or member would be their investment in the company. All right, we'll move on now and talk a little bit more about partnership. All right, number 9. Did both Dan and Lori operate the Curves franchise as a partnership? And that is pretty clear. Yes, they were formed as a partnership. They operated as a partnership. Number 10. When Dan and Lori renewed their commercial lease for a second 3-year term, were they still a partnership? And factually, yes, we know that they were still a partnership. All right. Now, number 11, Dan and Lori divorced before or after the end of their second 3-year term. They divorced before the end of their second 3-year term. Number 12, when Lori signed for another extension, did Lori tell or Dan tell Flying Cat about the divorce? No. Flying Cat was not informed about the divorce. Right. Number 13, at the time of the signing of the extension, it was reasonable or unreasonable for Flying Cat to believe that Dan and Lori remained partners in the Curves franchise. It is fairly reasonable because they had not been informed otherwise that the partnership was no longer operating. All right, number 14. A court would likely find that Dan liable or not liable for the $21,000 debt that accrued before the end of the second term. Well, Dan had signed that second term contract, and so he would be liable on that $21,000 debt. Now, 15, would a court likely hold that Dan is responsible for the remaining debt that accrued after the extension signed by Lori? And in this case, he would be, liable because Lori was signing for the partnership there. All right, and that would have to be settled between Dan and Lori, who has to bear that. But as far as the two of them being obligated, the two of them are obligated. All right, and so number 16, why? Right, Flying Cat would have reasonably believed that both Dan and Lori were partners at the time the extension was signed. Therefore, would Dan likely be held liable by the court for the nearly $50,000 debt the partnership accrued? And yes. And this would be, just unfortunate for Dan and something to be worked out between him and Lori. All right, now to follow up on this assignment, we're going to take a look at the second part of it, which is the what if section. Let me see if I have this. I thought I had it open, but let me just open it now if it's not open. This is usually shorter. There's only 2 questions here after the authors changed the facts a bit here. All right, so what if the facts were different? Assume that Dan notified Flying Cat that he was no longer a partner in the partnership before Lori signed the extension. Would Dan likely be held liable for any debts after Lori signed the extension agreement? Well, if the notice had gone out properly to Flying Cat, no, Dan would no longer be obligated on any extension that Lori signed, because Flying Cat would have the full information about what's going on, that Lori is no longer partners with Dan. So it's not really a partnership taking on this obligation. And then number two, why? Well, Flying Cat would have been reasonably notified that Dan was no longer a partner in the partnership. So we finished both exercises for the case problem analysis in chapter 37, and that should help you to complete all of the assignments on time for this week.